The sound of shattering glass and panic cries cut through the hum of a busy city street one rainy evening. Under the flickering neon lights of downtown, an unimaginable moment unfolded. Officer Derek Owens, whose uniform had once inspired trust, now exuded an air of cold hostility. In the midst of a routine traffic stop, his eyes had burned with an unspoken rage. As he stepped out of his cruiser onto the slick pavement, his gaze locked onto James Carter, a soft-spoken black father cradling his newborn baby tightly against his chest. Without warning, in a flash of brutality that stunned onlookers, Officer Owens raised his weapon and fired. The deafening crack of the shot echoed off the rain-soaked buildings as James staggered, his arm instinctively protecting the fragile life he held. In that horrifying instant, time seemed to slow down. The world around them fell into a state of suspended shock as screams filled the air and bystanders fumbled for their phones, desperate to record what had just happened. James's eyes, wide with terror and pain, reflected the shock of an act that defied everything a community should stand for. The innocent baby, barely aware of the chaos, whimpered softly in his father's arms. The incident was swift, violent, and steeped in the kind of prejudice that many had feared still existed in the corridors of power. Officer Owens, his face twisted in an expression of unrepentant cruelty, continued to shout incoherent justifications even as the reality of his actions began to settle in. Within moments, the scene erupted into chaos. People shouted, some cried, and the sounds of sirens began to rise in the distance. The gravity of the situation was impossible to ignore. A life had been irreversibly altered, and the consequences of a single, racist act were just beginning to ripple through the community. Amidst the turmoil, one phone call rang out, a call that would soon alter the course of events in a way that no one could have predicted. The clear, steady voice on the other end promised accountability and swift action. In that split second, as emotions soared and the night darkened with sorrow and outrage, every heart in the crowd pounded with one unspoken question. Who would rise to demand justice? And what would be the fallout of this act of violence? The seeds of an extraordinary turning point had been planted, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would expose deep-rooted injustice and transform lives forever. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel and comment below where you are watching from. For our returning subscribers, thank you so much for your unwavering support. It truly means a lot to our community. Central to this unfolding tragedy was James Carter, a gentle soul and devoted father who had spent his life striving to provide for his family against all odds. In his mid-30s, James was known for his calm demeanor, his unwavering dedication to his work as a community organizer, and his deep love for his newborn child. The day had begun like any other, a hopeful father preparing to pick up his baby from the hospital, planning to return home to a modest apartment filled with the warmth of family. His presence was marked by kindness, a quiet strength that many admired, and a humility that spoke of countless struggles overcome. In stark contrast to James was Officer Derek Owens, a veteran of the Central City Police Department. Owens had served for over 15 years, and his uniform was a symbol of authority and discipline. At least, that was how he liked to see himself. Over time, however, a bitterness had taken root in Owens, fueled by personal biases and a hardened outlook that blinded him to the humanity of those he was meant to protect. His reputation among his peers was mixed. While some admired his unyielding enforcement of the law, others whispered about his tendency to let prejudice guide his actions. The setting for this tragedy was a busy urban street in Central City, a place where modernity met history. Neon signs and digital billboards illuminated the wet pavement as rain fell steadily from a dark, brooding sky. Tall skyscrapers loomed overhead, their windows reflecting the city's restless energy. Amid this vibrant urban landscape, the police cruiser sat parked with its flashing lights, a stark reminder of the authority it represented. The street, usually a conduit of life and opportunity, was now a stage for a confrontation that would expose the deep fractures in society. On that fateful night, as families and individuals went about their routines, The community was blissfully unaware that a moment of unimaginable cruelty was about to occur. The ordinary rhythm of life, marked by hurried footsteps, the murmur of conversation, and the relentless pulse of the city, was suddenly disrupted by the sound of a gunshot. In that instant, the line between order and chaos blurred, and the true cost of unchecked prejudice was laid bare. Bystanders, a mix of commuters and late-night revelers, froze as they witnessed the horrifying scene. Some clutched their phones to capture the moment. Others stared in silent horror. The gravity of the incident was underscored by the rain, which fell like a cold, unfeeling curtain, washing over the scene and adding a melancholic sheen to the unfolding tragedy. The community of Central City prided itself on resilience and diversity. Yet, in that rain-soaked moment, the old wounds of racial injustice were reopened, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation that would challenge the very foundations of power and authority. As the lives of James Carter and his innocent baby hung in the balance, the stage was set for an explosive chain of events, a journey toward accountability and, ultimately, redemption. Immediately following the gunshot, the urban street transformed into a scene of utter pandemonium. Officer Derek Owens, still standing by his cruiser, appeared momentarily paralyzed, a stark contrast to his earlier aggression. His face, contorted with a mixture of anger and shock, betrayed the internal conflict that now gripped him. Meanwhile, emergency sirens grew louder as fellow officers and paramedics rushed toward the scene. James Carter, crumpled on the wet pavement with his baby clutched protectively to his chest, was surrounded by a scattering of onlookers. Some attempted to offer comfort, while others recorded the unfolding disaster on their phones. The atmosphere was thick with a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. The very notion that a black father, who had done nothing but love and protect his child, could be targeted so viciously by the hand of authority was beyond comprehension. Within moments, word of the shooting spread through social media. Videos capturing the horror of the incident. Officer Owens's cold, unrepentant gaze, the anguished cry of the wounded father, and the silent terror in the eyes of the baby began circulating online. Hashtags like hashtag Justice for James and hashtag #IndRacist Brutality surged in popularity, drawing the attention of community leaders, activists, and news outlets alike. As the investigation was launched, internal records from the police department revealed that Officer Owens had been the subject of previous complaints, though none had escalated to this level of brutality. Whispers among the ranks suggested that his actions were not an isolated lapse in judgment, but part of a long-standing pattern of bias that had festered over years of unchecked authority. The discovery of these records added fuel to the already blazing fire of public outrage, and the pressure for accountability mounted rapidly. Amid the growing chaos, a bystander, an older man with gentle eyes, stepped forward and recounted what he had seen. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years, he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "and I have never witnessed such cruelty from our police. This isn't just about one act. It's about a system that allows hate to thrive." His testimony, recorded by several onlookers, became one of many pieces of evidence that painted a damning picture of the officer's behavior. In the midst of these events, a crucial twist began to emerge. A phone call, made by a witness who had been monitoring the situation closely, cut through the cacophony of voices. The call was handled by a high-ranking official from the department, a figure whose identity was known only to a few, and its contents hinted at swift, no-nonsense action. The sound of that phone call, clear and authoritative, provided the first glimmer of hope that justice might prevail. It also raised burning questions. Who was this person, and how would their intervention change the course of events? Back at the scene, as paramedics rushed to attend to James Carter and his baby, Officer Owens finally seemed to snap out of his stupor. His face, now a mixture of guilt and regret, suggested that the consequences of his actions were beginning to sink in. The once unquestioned authority of the officer was crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence and growing public pressure. Within the police department, internal investigators began to compile all available data, digital logs from the cruiser's dashboard, eyewitness statements, and previous disciplinary records. Every new piece of evidence reinforced the fact that Officer Owens had acted with a bias that could no longer be ignored. The internal atmosphere grew tense as senior officials realized that they were facing not just a case of excessive force, but a systemic problem that demanded a far-reaching response. As the day turned into night, the conflict had already transcended the boundaries of a simple traffic stop. It had become a symbol, a rallying cry for change, and a stark reminder that even those entrusted with upholding the law could fall prey to their own prejudices. The public outcry grew louder, and every new post, every shared video, only added to the collective demand: justice for James Carter and accountability for the racist brutality that had marred the night. The scene was set for a dramatic escalation. The stage was now prepared for the long-anticipated turning point, a moment when the system would be forced to reckon with its failures, and when the echoes of that fateful gunshot would finally be answered with decisive action. The tension was almost tangible, as if the entire city held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. In the days following the shooting, Central City was engulfed by a storm of controversy and calls for justice. Social media platforms lit up with images and videos of the incident, and the hashtag Justice for James spread like wildfire. News outlets provided round-the-clock coverage, and community rallies sprang up in protest of the blatant act of racism and violence. Within the police department, the internal investigation deepened with unprecedented urgency. Senior officials, alarmed by the emerging pattern of bias in Officer Owens's past, convened emergency meetings. Lieutenant Marcus Daniels, known for his steadfast commitment to accountability, led the investigation with a resolve that resonated deeply with his team. "We cannot allow such egregious acts to be swept under the rug," Daniels declared in a tense meeting. His words echoed in the halls of the department, stirring a growing movement among younger officers who had long suspected that systemic issues were at play. Digital logs, surveillance footage, and leaked internal memos began to paint a picture that was as damning as it was inescapable. The investigation uncovered that Officer Owens had been repeatedly reprimanded for minor incidents that, in hindsight, were early signs of a broader, unchecked prejudice. As these records were compiled, the public's outrage intensified. Activists and community leaders demanded that every aspect of the department be scrutinized and that those responsible for enabling such behavior be held accountable. Outside the department, protests erupted on the streets of Central City. Crowds gathered in front of the police headquarters and in busy public squares, brandishing signs that read, "No to racism," and "Protect our community." Chants of "Justice now" and "Enough is enough" filled the air, and local celebrities and influencers lent their voices to the cause. The pressure on the department was immense, and every passing hour saw new demands for change. At a critical press conference held at the city's community center, a well-respected civil rights advocate condemned the shooting in no uncertain terms. "This incident is a stark reminder that our justice system is still flawed," he proclaimed. "It is not enough to simply promise change. We must see it in action. Today, we call on the authorities to deliver swift and unequivocal accountability." His words resonated across the media, and the outcry reached a crescendo as the nation watched. Back within the airline's internal offices, discussions grew heated as top executives debated the extent of the damage to their reputation. The scandal had far-reaching implications. Not only did it highlight the need for internal reform within the police department, but it also cast a shadow over the entire justice system. A series of internal memos leaked to the press revealed that high-ranking officials had known about Officer Owens's previous conduct, but bureaucratic inertia had allowed his behavior to persist unchecked. This revelation added a new layer of betrayal, as many felt that those in power had not done enough to protect the community. As the internal investigation continued, a turning point began to emerge. A senior officer, who had long been a mentor to many in the department, came forward with crucial testimony. "I have seen signs of bias in Owens's actions for years," he stated in a confidential interview. "We ignored them, thinking they were minor issues. But now, the evidence is undeniable, and we must face the consequences. This candid admission, when made public, further galvanized the call for sweeping reforms. In the midst of these escalating tensions, the role of technology and social media became ever more important. Live streams of protests, viral videos of the incident, and real-time updates on the investigation fueled a nationwide debate about racial injustice in law enforcement. The digital evidence was irrefutable, and every shared post added weight to the demands for accountability. With each passing day, the pressure on Central City's police department grew. Internal hearings were scheduled, and disciplinary panels were convened to decide the fate of Officer Owens. The collective voice of the community, now louder than ever, demanded that justice be swift and uncompromising. "No one is above the law" became the rallying cry that echoed through both the streets and the boardrooms. By the end of this turbulent week, Central City was on the verge of a major transformation. The internal investigation, backed by overwhelming digital evidence and a united public outcry, set the stage for a dramatic turning point, one that would force a reckoning with a system long tainted by unchecked prejudice. The rising tension had reached its peak, and every stakeholder, be it within the department or among the citizens of Central City, knew that the moment of truth was imminent. The pivotal moment arrived on a brisk afternoon in a packed conference room at Central City Police Headquarters. The room was filled with senior executives, legal advisors, community representatives, and local media, all gathered to hear the final decision of the internal investigation. With a calm, authoritative presence, Senior Manager Carlo Ortiz stepped up to the podium. After a thorough and exhaustive review of all digital records, surveillance footage, and eyewitness testimonies, we have reached a clear conclusion, Carla began, her voice steady and resolute. It is evident that Officer Derek Owens' actions that night were driven by personal bias and have caused immeasurable harm to Mr. Carter and our community. His conduct is completely unacceptable and violates the core principles of our department. A profound silence fell over the room as Ortiz continued. Effective immediately, Officer Owens is suspended from duty pending a full disciplinary review. This decision is not only a necessary corrective measure, but also a powerful statement that no one, regardless of their position, is above accountability. Her words resonated deeply, and every eye in the room fixed on the officer, whose once unyielding expression had given way to shock and regret. At that critical moment, a calm, yet powerful voice emerged from the back of the room. It belonged to James Carter, the man who had been brutally shot while holding his baby. Rising to his feet with quiet dignity, he addressed the assembly. "I have always believed that every life deserves respect and protection. Today, I stand before you not as a victim, but as a voice for all who have suffered from injustice. Let this moment mark the beginning of a future where accountability is the norm and where no act of bias goes unanswered." His words, delivered with measured strength, filled the room with a sense of justice and collective resolve. Applause broke out, mingling with solemn nods of approval. Inspector David Ramirez then presented the final dossier, a comprehensive compilation of internal memos, security footage, and eyewitness statements that incontrovertibly demonstrated a pattern of discriminatory behavior by Officer Owens. With each piece of evidence, the truth became undeniable. The officer's actions were not isolated but part of a broader, systemic issue. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously agreed that the evidence was irrefutable. The turning point was complete. The resounding decision to suspend Officer Owens sent a powerful message throughout the department and the community alike. No one, regardless of their years of service or rank, would be allowed to act on personal bias without facing consequences. The shock on Owens's face, captured by every camera in the room, became an enduring symbol of the day when the truth finally broke through the facade of authority. In that moment, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The institution, long criticized for its tolerance of prejudice, now embraced the promise of reform and accountability. The decision was celebrated not only as a punitive measure, but as a transformative step toward healing, a bold affirmation that justice would prevail even in the darkest moments. For James Carter, for his child, and for the entire community, this turning point was a beacon of hope, signaling the dawn of a new era where respect and fairness were paramount. In the weeks following the dramatic verdict, Central City Police Headquarters and the broader community embarked on a journey of healing and reform. News of Officer Owens's suspension and the comprehensive internal investigation spread rapidly through local media and social networks. The decision was widely hailed as a turning point in the fight against racial injustice and was seen as a bold statement that accountability would no longer be optional. James Carter, whose life had been upended by that fateful night, emerged as a symbol of quiet resilience. Despite the pain and trauma he endured, he dedicated himself to speaking out about his experience and advocating for change. In community forums, town hall meetings, and interviews, James stressed the importance of protecting every citizen from unchecked abuse of power. His calm and dignified demeanor resonated deeply with people, inspiring countless others to demand that no one be allowed to act with impunity. Within the police department, Senior Manager Carlo Ortiz and Lieutenant Marcus Daniels wasted no time in implementing sweeping reforms. New training programs on cultural sensitivity, ethical conduct, and mental health support were rolled out for all officers. Strict oversight mechanisms and regular evaluations were instituted to ensure that every complaint of discriminatory behavior was thoroughly investigated. We are committed to creating an environment where every officer is held to the highest standards of integrity, Daniels declared in a department-wide meeting. These measures were not merely reactive. They signaled a genuine commitment to long-overdue change. The internal investigation into Officer Owens's conduct also sparked a broader conversation about the need to address personal traumas within law enforcement. Workshops and counseling sessions were organized, and officers were encouraged to confront and heal from their pasts. The process was difficult and fraught with challenges, but it ultimately helped to foster a culture of empathy and accountability, a culture that recognized the importance of both professional excellence and personal well-being. Public sentiment mirrored these internal changes. Community rallies and public demonstrations, featuring signs with slogans such as "No More Injustice" and "Equality for All," continued to gather momentum. Local civil rights organizations and community leaders worked tirelessly to ensure that the reforms were not just temporary fixes, but part of a long-term commitment to dismantling systemic racism. The narrative of that fateful night had transformed from one of horror and outrage into a beacon for change, a testament to the power of collective action in the face of injustice. One final public gathering was held in the plaza outside City Hall. Under the soft glow of the setting sun, community members, police officials, and local leaders assembled to celebrate the progress that had been made. Lieutenant Marcus Daniels addressed the crowd, his voice filled with hope. "Today, we have taken a stand for justice. Let us continue to work together to build a future where every person is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Our journey toward reform is just beginning, and together, we will ensure that no act of discrimination ever goes unchallenged." His words were met with resounding applause and a renewed sense of unity that rippled throughout the assembly. As Central City slowly returned to its routine, the legacy of that fateful night endured. The incident had sparked a transformative movement, a movement that had forced the community to confront its deepest flaws and to commit to lasting change. The painful memory of that night, with its shock and sorrow, became a catalyst for progress, serving as a reminder that when accountability meets collective resolve, even the most entrenched prejudices can be overcome. In the end, the story of that night was not just one of violence and tragedy. It was a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Central City emerged stronger and more united, with the promise of a future where every individual, regardless of race or background, is valued and respected. The transformation that began with one act of brutality had grown into a legacy of hope, a legacy that would continue to inspire generations to come.